Hey guys, Jefferson from Red Dirt Rods. Today we are going to install the Speed Direct Steeroids rack and pinion conversion for a C2-C3 Corvette chassis. We've got all of the components laid out on our bench, and we're going to do some pre-assembly before we get to the actual car. So the components of our kit, the main piece is the rack itself. And this is a remanufactured unit, and it is a center steer piece, which means that this section moves here to here. You have about 6.1 inches of side-to-side movement. One piece that we want to make a note of on the rack is this follower inside here. Occasionally during shipping, this piece can get loose and fall inside the bellows here. If you bolt this all together with this not being in place, it'll damage the rack. So what you want to do is just make sure that you have these metal spacers in here. You can kind of see it here. You just want to make sure you have that in place. There should be, it's about an inch long, about an inch deep spacer inside here. Then these are metric bolts, and they have these special washers called Nordlock washers. And you have to make sure you put those on here. And then we're going to take our tie rod bracket. The long side goes towards the passenger side, and it also has to face up. If you put it on backwards, nothing's going to work. So you want to have this flipped up. This is the correct orientation for the tie rod end bracket. Then we're going to take our bolts, pass them through, and just hand tighten them. Now this is the trial fit. When you actually have the rack installed in the car, you're going to take these back out one at a time and apply some high strength red thread locker and torque these to 80 foot-pounds. We're just going to run them down with our impact just to keep them in place, but we don't want to tighten this down yet. Another thing you might want to note, your movement of your tie rod bracket versus your steel lines. Sometimes these lines can get in the way. You don't want this to hit your steel lines. If they do, just gently pry them out of the way. Next, we're going to pre-assemble our tie rod sleeves. Now this is, one side is right hand thread, one side is left hand thread, so you can turn it and it'll pull it in tighter or spread it out without having to disassemble anything. Left hand thread nuts have little hash marks on each corner, and then these are the inner tie rod ends. We're just going to do the same thing here. Next, we're going to put some anti-seize on the threads for both the inner and the outer tie rod ends. You don't have to wear gloves, but anti-seize gets all over everything, so I like to wear gloves when I'm doing this. You don't need a lot. Just get a little on the end of each one. These are aluminum and these are steel, and anytime you have differentiating metals, they can seize and gall up over time, and you want to make sure that that doesn't happen. The left hand thread is on the side of these tie rod shafts that have the two flats for your wrench. And we're just going to thread these on all the way to spread out that anti-seize. Alright, the next step is to mount the tie rod ends to the tie rod bracket. We're going to use this large bolt with a lock washer. And again, this is just the pre-fit. We will install thread locker on each one of these bolts. Now we're going to set the initial width of our steering setup, but to do that we need a measurement off of the original steering that we took off earlier. And all we need to do is have it set up in a straight line, and we're going to measure from tie rod to tie rod. Looks like we are 46 5/8 center to center. So we're going to translate that measurement over to our new setup. We're measuring center to center on our new setup. We have 2 threads showing on the end of each jam nut so that these are equal. And we have 45 7/8. We're looking for 46 5/8. So that's 3/4 of an inch. So what we're going to do is spread these out 5/16, and that should get us right where we need to be. So we're going to just go ahead and take this over here. Keep that marked. As we do this, we're going to count the threads, and then we'll match it on the other side. So what we want to do is make a small mark with a Sharpie that we can see. That's our center. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we're going to see what our overall is. That's really close. So now we'll do the same on this side. 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure you hold both ends so that they both spread out and one side isn't moving out and the other side staying still. Probably going to take this in just a little bit on each side, about 1/4 of a turn. 46 5/8. That should work quite nice. Now, in order to keep this in that position, we're going to set the lock nuts, the jam nuts. The flats are a 13/16, and then the jam nuts are 15/16. I'm just going to snug those up. Okay. Now these are the steering linkage components. This is what will connect the steering linkage to the rack. This double U-joint connects the column to the steering link. The sticker side, that goes towards the steering column. You'll notice that the kit comes with some shorter set screws, and these have long set screws installed. If you have a clearance issue, you can remove these long set screws with the jam nuts and use these with thread locker. This is the steering shaft. We're going to install that into the upper joint. Now if you look in here, this is the end of the shaft. You see the splines here. This needs to be no more than flush with the inside of the U-joint saddle. If this shaft extends past that, it can hit this piece, which will lock up the whole system and can create a dangerous situation. So usually it's best to have it just under flush, as I have here. So then we can just lightly snug it. This will all get adjusted in the car later on. This is our pre-assembly. And we take this U-joint. This is the lower joint. This is the joint that's going to connect the steering link to the rack. Now if you'll notice, this one has 2 set screws and jam nuts. This is a double D style U-joint, and this mounts to the rack. This is a 17mm double D. So another issue that's commonly found with the U-joint assemblies is getting them out of phase. If I were to install this as shown, if I were to install this like so, where this saddle is 90 degrees opposite of this saddle, that will create an awkward working position for both U-joints and can prematurely wear out the U-joints. Also can create binding. So you want to have these U-joints in phase. Now 1 or 2 teeth off is okay. You can have it here, you can have it here, if it is absolutely necessary to solve a binding issue. But most of the time, having them in phase 100% just like this is the way you want to go. So we're just going to snug that one up. A common problem on assembling the steering shaft is installing the support rod bearing. It doesn't always slide on nice and easy, as this one is not. So you can take a piece of sandpaper, this is 80 grit, and this is an aluminum rod, so it'll come off pretty quick. We're just going to wrap it around like this and run it across the shaft. Alright, clean the shaft off, and then now it'll slide all the way on. Then we're going to go ahead and take the other joint. Make sure the phasing is correct. Snug it down. Now we can take this assembly over to the car.